Well, I want to thank you. Thank you for this opportunity for me to be able to share my stories. If I had to entitle my little speech to you today, my sharing, I would entitle it, I Am Not a Single Story. And for those of us that were in one of the workshops on cultural humility, it was profound, that message that came across. So I tried to gauge how I wanted to do my little talk and wanted it to be a little bit different. I'm a storyteller, but I realized because of time, I'm gonna need to hit the highlights that I believe are essential to our time together. So I ask that you bear with me. What I am going to do is I'm gonna try to take you on my journey. So I think for the first time, I'm going to talk about my life pre-Bridge of Hope so that you would have a sense of who I was before I relocated to Pennsylvania, so that you would hopefully get an idea of the strength that I came with because of my stories. So I am the eldest of 6 children, born to my mother, who was a single parent. My mother was young when she gave birth to myself and my siblings. By the age of 23, all 6 of us were born. There was some family support, not a lot, but there was some family support. So my mom struggled in raising 6 children all by herself. What I saw in my mom was strength and courage, stick-to-itiveness, determination, pride in that she was able to care for all of her children. At different points in my childhood, we became involved with child welfare. And in honoring my mom's memory, my late mom's memory, I won't go into all the specifics of it, but suffice it to say, I ended up in foster care at the age of 10 years old. So I grew up in the foster care system. I aged out of the system when I was 19 years old and pregnant with my daughter. So I lived in foster homes, a couple of foster homes, eventually a group home, and then aged out of the system, went into a maternity shelter where I gave birth to my daughter, and had several transitions until I eventually ended up living on my own. Through the course of my pregnancy with my daughter, I attended college. I attended York College, which is in Jamaica, New York. I know there's a York out here as well. When my daughter was born, I continued to attend college and brought her to school with me every day because my education was very important to me. She became Kingsborough's baby because at that time I then transitioned to Kingsborough. And I remember running for public office and everyone knew Janae. She truly was the college's baby. And in running for public office in school, I did my flyers and had pictures done and said, Janae said vote for her mom for student council. And I won a seat on student council. But it was hard. I had hard days. I remember coming into school and riding the bus and her crying the whole bus ride, and I could not console her. I remember the days when I would take her to my psychology class because I was a part of the Christian club, but everyone had class during that particular time, and so I would take her to class with me. And I remember my professor kicked us out of class one day, rightfully so, but I was wrong and strong back then. So when he kicked us out and said, "How do you expect a 1-year-old to sit through psychology?" And I huffed and got to the door and I said, "She's 11 months old," and walked out of the classroom. And we got through that time, and I got through that time certainly with God's grace, certainly believing that my life would not always be as hard and the struggle would not always be as hard. I remembered my mom's courage and my mom's strength. And there was a tenacity within myself that I didn't even know was there, but I was going to press my way. And fast forward, we graduated from Kingsborough College, and I went on and obtained my master's in social work and worked in child welfare in New York City. And I have had an extraordinary life. And I've said to myself and to my daughter very early on, our lives are destined for greatness. And I believe that because of God's Spirit that lives inside of me, I know that there are great things that are yet to come. And so while I'm living in New York, Brooklyn, New York, and I'm raising my daughter and got through school and I'm working, and things are tough, and I'm still experiencing, different challenges in life, relational challenges. I experienced being in a relationship where I experienced domestic violence in that relationship, and just was really feeling, I think, beat up by life when I made the decision that I wanted to relocate. Sorry. I wanted to relocate. I wanted a better life for myself. I wanted a better life for my daughter. I wanted to not have to struggle so hard. I wanted to be close enough to New York to get back home if I needed to, but yet far enough to say that I truly was away. And I thought that I would end up in Lancaster County, but all of my job offers came from Chester County, and so I believe that is where the Lord directed my steps. And so by the time we came to Chester County, I can tell you that I was a broken individual. My faith was very low. Still had that mustard seed faith though, but it was low. And I was tired. And I didn't know what would become of myself, what would become of my daughter. But I had a little hope that it had to get better. And so I was here in Pennsylvania for about 6 months, truly going through healing. I worked for an organization, where I was able to work. I was able to live where I worked, so I didn't have to worry about housing. Transportation was furnished for us. It was truly a time of peace and healing. I remember setting out my laundry on the clothesline. Now, I came from Brooklyn, and I often say I'm just a little girl that the Lord picked up from the hood and has placed me in great places. So I didn't experience clothesline and the sun drying my clothes or any of that. And that was healing to my very soul. And my spirit began to soar. And my hope began to increase. And I began to see that indeed our steps were ordered of the Lord, and this is where we are supposed to be. And I tell this part as part of my story. Where I lived and worked was affiliated with a Christian organization. And I remember one night I was watching Joseph, the movie, one of my favorite Bible stories, but I was watching it in film. And I remember saying to myself, wow, Lord, I want to be like Joseph. I want to have faith like Joseph. I want to believe you like Joseph. I don't want to doubt you or question you when things get hard. I want to be like Joseph. And then I say, be mindful of what you ask for. As I said, I was in my location for 6 months, and then we became homeless. Up until that point, I had not even rode on the city bus. You know, everything was furnished. And I remember thinking, this was not part of the plan. You know, this was our new beginning. This was our start over. This was what was going to be good for my daughter. This was what was going to be good for myself. And I know certainly from the challenges in my life and the adversity, God has always been with me. He's there in the adversity. And so I made a decision to believe that. I made a decision to believe, God, you ordered my steps to be here. And because you did, I'm not going to gather my things and run back to New York. This is where I'm supposed to be. I also realized during that time that we were totally and completely alone. Like, we were here all by ourselves. When I was at the location that we lived and worked, there were people around us. But when we became homeless, we were alone. I was alone and I was fearful. And as a mom, I felt like a failure, right? How did I pull my daughter away from our family in New York to bring her here to end up in a shelter? How did I do that? What was wrong with my decision making? And yet I believed that our steps were ordered of the Lord. I was in the shelter in Coatesville, and I remember filling out paperwork and meeting with the resource individual that was part of the shelter, and being connected to Bridge of Hope. And I remember the person telling me, well, I believe that these are the requirements, accountability, and you'll work with a group of people, and you know, there'll be assistance with rent and different things like that. And I was like, okay, that works for me. I can do that. What I asked for the most was friendship, because I had no one. I had no friends. It was myself and my daughter. And the idea that I would have a group of people that would come alongside me, that would walk with me, that would bear the weight and uphold me during that most challenging time in my life, was what my heart so desired. And so I went through the process, and I'm giving highlights here, of going through the Bridge of Hope program. One of the things I remember saying during my interview, because again, believing that the Lord ordered my steps, believing that I'm going through this and I'm going through it for a reason, and that God had my back and He would supply everything that I needed. I remember saying to the person that I was working with at Bridge of Hope, you don't have to worry that you need to get an African American group. So as a social worker, I'm particularly sensitive to cultural differences and beliefs or what have you. And I said, you don't have to worry that you need to do that. I said, whomever you get, I believe that those are going to be people that God handpicked for me. And I can tell you truly that the 12 women, 12 Caucasian women, and I never leave out their husbands, surrounded me and was indeed the group that God handpicked for us. I remember the first day that I met them. I was surprised by the concern that I had, but nevertheless I had it. I remember wanting or needing to know that they didn't pity me, because I wasn't looking for pity. You know, I was an educated woman. I worked. In my mind, I shouldn't have even been going through this experience, right? Because up until then, homelessness didn't happen to people like me. I had it together, and homelessness didn't visit people that had it together. But I remember that first night, it being real important that they didn't pity me, that they were able to see me beyond my homeless experience, that whatever they may have heard, whatever stories or stereotypes or myths about the Black family, that I wasn't the poster child for that. That was important to me. That although I was down, I had value. I had a voice and I had perspective, and I wanted them to know that. That was important to me. That I had the most wonderful experience with my mentor group, with my friends, with the 12 women. And while I was closer to some more than I was to others, there was still a connection with all of them. They were kind and they were caring, and we heard this word throughout the conference. They were curious. So assumptions were not made about myself and my daughter. Questions were asked. They were engaged in our lives. For the purposes of my talk here, I looked up the word support, because that's what they were for me, my support, in every aspect of what that word means. And one definition says, a thing that bears the weight of something or keeps it upright. And that's what they were for me. They were our weight bearers, and they helped to keep us upright. Because while I, had my education, I was confident in so many other areas, I still struggled. I struggled with stigma. I struggled with feeling like I failed my daughter. I struggled, and they were there. What I wanted from them was genuineness. I needed them to be straightforward, and I needed them to be honest, and I needed them to let me know if I've missed the mark relationally, right? Because I had the Bridge of Hope staff that did a phenomenal job. And I'll take a moment to interject this. I remember working with our family resource coordinator. And I remember her coming into my home and we would go over my budgeting. And remember, I thought I had it all together, right? Not. And she would come in and work with us, and I had tude. You know, as the young people said, I had tude. I had attitude. Like, how is she coming in and, you know, telling me how to do my budget? I'm a professional. I have my social work degree and da-da-da-da-da. And she also came in and taught me how to play with my daughter. Because in being a single mom, I was so engaged in the process of taking care of her and providing for her. We didn't play. And she would come and we would have family board game night. And she learned how very competitive we both were. And we still are, but we play. I learned that through Dot Leatherman is the person that I work with. But back to the budgeting, and I remember Dot would come and I would just give her my attitude. I knew enough to be compliant, but I wasn't happy about it. And Dot was so skilled in what she would do with me. One big contention for us was my cable bill. So my cable bill, I had a pretty significant cable bill because I had HBO and, you know, all of the channels. And I remember the first time Dot met with me and introduced the idea of not having HBO or all of the other Showtime and, you know, what? I don't understand. What do you mean if I did this, it would reduce my bill, you know, significantly? But what about this show and that show? But in her skillfulness, she didn't say to me, oh, you have to do this. She dropped the seed of information. The seed of information. You know, your bill will be reduced by this much. You'll have these resources that you can do other things with. So needless to say, I came to the decision all by myself that I was going to reduce my cable bill and made the decision to have standard, basic and standard cable. And through Dot's work with me and her patience and just her skillfulness and honoring my dignity of risk, right? Me being able to make my own decisions regardless of what the consequence would be. I was an adult and I was going to do that and deal with whatever those consequences were going to be. To this day, I call myself the budget queen. There is not a paycheck that I receive that I touch before I enter into my notebook what's going on. I graduated in the year 2000 and I have stacks of notebooks. I have helped family members, I have helped my best friends. And that's not a skill that I had that I came with. I got that through Bridge of Hope and through the work that Dot Letterman did with me, honoring who I was and allowing me to come to that place on my own. About my mentors, so again, because I think I was so starved for relationship, I would do just about whatever was required of me. There were no issues there. Even if I did it with tude, I did it. With my mentors, we had two hiccups in our interaction with one another. And I would say the way that this was handled, I would hope, would be an example for others. I have been employed with Chester County Department of Children, Youth, and Families since October 18th, 1999. So it's going on 16 years that I've been at my current job. When I was hired, I did not have a car. And I was hired as a caseworker, and if you're familiar with casework, you know, you're going out in the community, you're doing home visits. I didn't have a car, but my friends, my mentors, got together and did a 2-week schedule of getting me back and forth to work. I didn't live far away from my office, maybe 30 minutes, but there was someone who took me, got Janae off where she needed to go, and picked me up in the evenings. And we did that for about 2 weeks. And during that time, I was praying for a car. And I was praying that God would give me favor, and that God would bless me, that there would be a dealership that would give me a loan. So I often say I was praying for debt. Thank God that He answers us, right? In my devotion this morning, I was reminded that He either answers with a yes, with a no, or with a wait. And I am almost positive that it was a no. But I wasn't hearing, so I'm praying and crying out to the Lord, please, please, Lord, give me debt, essentially is what I was asking for, as I was asking to be approved for loans so that I could get a car. And again, my mentors, we would go to the different car dealerships, and they were right there beside me. And I can tell you, I felt the prayer that was going on, because I know that they knew that that was not the right choice for me, that it wasn't the right plan for me to take on this set of debt while I was just getting myself transitioned into my home and into my job. But what I remember so clearly about that time of interaction was how dignified they treated me through that process. We would go to the car dealerships, I would ask the questions that I had, they would even chime in and ask questions. We would, share information, pros and cons. Never once did one of them say, you should not do this. This is not the right thing for you to do. This is going to totally set you back. Not once. Did they think that, feel that? Probably. Were they probably calling the office, sharing their concerns? Probably. But they weren't dealing with me in that mode. They were prayerful, and they walked alongside me. Long story short, in the end, no debt, because God said no, even though I was praying. Hershey Motors worked with Bridge of Hope. It's a dealership in my area. And they donated or gave a vehicle to Bridge of Hope for a nominal fee of $2,500 outright. So I owned my first vehicle for $2,500. There were no car notes to it. I paid insurance. It didn't set me back in my budgeting. And I had my car. And more importantly, I had a closer connection with my group, because when I think about that, in my mind, I choose to believe that they had to have a trust that I would come to the right place without them interjecting their values and opinions about it. And in supporting me through physically being there and asking questions and considering the information, and also through prayer. One other real quick, and I'll be closing. Another hiccup that I had with my group, and I know that they were coming from a good place with this, was around confidentiality. One of the prayers I pray for myself is, Lord, enlarge my territory. When I say to people that I am a shy person, when I say to folks that I'm a very private person, it's hard for them to believe that. And I believe it's the enlarging of my territory because of my life experiences and what the Lord would have me do in sharing. But confidentiality was huge, because I would have an achievement or something would happen, and before I could share it with the group, they had shared it with each other. And I struggled with that, because then when I would go or I would get a phone call, they're saying, oh, we heard this, we heard that. And I go along and I would say, oh, I wish I had the opportunity to tell you myself. So I entered into what I didn't know then was crucial conversation. And I had to share with my group that while I know that they were coming from a good place and sharing about me, that I wanted the opportunity to do that myself. It was totally received. And when I would share different things about myself personally, I would get a question, is it okay for me to share this with the group? So they honored and respected that request. Those were, for me, the two hiccups, I would say, that we had. Again, an extraordinary experience, one that has changed my life, that has caused me to ever want to be a part of Bridge of Hope. I served on the boards of Lancaster and Chester County as a participant. I now serve on the national board. I want to give back in any way possible. So if it means being very public with my stories and sharing that it would make a difference for someone else, so be it. I want to leave you with this last thought. I am a rose that blossomed through the concrete. Concrete being the many adverse situations in my life. And though my petals were bruised, damaged, I continued to blossom, and new buds replaced those that were damaged. As I think of the women and children in Bridge of Hope, I think of them as roses that are growing through the crevices of hopelessness and crossing over bridges of hope to realize what was always inside of them, their God-given destiny and purposes. Thank you.